So there's been some debate about whether or not you should parry with the edge or the flat of the blade. Now this here is actually the edge, so this is how you should parry, but for the viewer's sake, let's call it this is the flat and this is the edge, because you guys can see that better. So a lot of the people who argue that you should parry with the flat of the blade, or like this, because if you have the opponent's sword coming down at you like that, you stop it with the flat. Some people argue that, and you shouldn't, but you can parry like that if you really want to. But the reason behind this is because you don't damage the edge as much. Because, let's face it, you go into any battlefield, no matter what century it is, and your equipment's not going to come out completely unharmed, unless you're not fighting. So, knights wouldn't go into a battlefield and just be surprised when their swords got damaged from, hitting other people wearing plate armor. Because guess what? Swords will not cut through plates, no matter what fantasy would have you want to believe. So, the two main problems with this is if you parry with the flat, like this, the sword, your opponent's sword, tends to slide around a lot more on your blade. Because when you take two thin, sharpened pieces of steel and you hit them together, they bite in a little bit to each other because the steel is digging in. But that doesn't happen as much when you parry with the flat of the blade, which would be technically like this. Now, the other main problem with this is swords like to bend this way. Specifically, they like to flex, because bending implies that it does that and then doesn't bend back into shape. If you look at any slow motion cutting video with a sword, you're likely going to see that the sword is flexing. Weird flex, but okay. If you look at any videos where swords are cutting through something substantial, like a tatami mat or a branch, you'll notice the sword does wobble a lot, and that's completely normal, because if it didn't do that, it would shatter. And then what good is a sword to you if it's shattered? You can still stab with it at least, but you're at a significant range disadvantage now. So when your sword flexes like this, which all swords do, your opponent, if they hit as hard as they can, could power through your blocking and just hit you anyway, so that doesn't do you a whole lot of good. As Lindy Beige once said, you should only put the amount of effort into something as it takes. So you shouldn't need to put as much effort into whatever it is that you're doing as you can, just the amount that you need to. So basically, the example he used is if someone throws a punch at you, you don't want to take your hand and just smash it away like that, because now you're completely exposed and they've got another fist, probably. Unless you're fighting an amputee, which is just not a fair advantage. Well, it is for you, but not for them. So now, if they take their sword and they smash it into your sword, it's not really a big concern on the battlefield, but you're going to wear out the swords quicker that way if you're hitting as hard as you possibly can. But, like I said, not really concerned when you're fighting for your life. Now, the other example that he used is if someone throws a punch at you, you just kind of want to push it to the side, because now, you're not extending yourself, or you're not exerting extra energy into what you're doing. So while you can parry with the flat of the blade, and it could still work, especially if you hit like down here where it doesn't flex as much, because it flexes a lot more to the tip than down by the guard, or the hilt, then you're probably going to be okay anyway. But if you parry with the flat, or with the edge of the blade, you'll notice that the sword does not bend this way. And the same can be said for any material. It always bends more easily one way than the other. If you take a small piece of rectangular steel, you'll notice that if you lay it flat, it is more likely to bend that way than if you take it on the side and try to bend it. And that's essentially what a sword is. It's just a piece of steel with blades. So when you do parry with the side or the blade of your sword, it does actually give you a bit more control with the opponent's sword because it bites in a little bit. So there's a lot more maneuverability if you are parrying with the edge of the sword than with just the flat. Now, people still would argue that you should parry with the flat of the blade because you won't wear out your sword as quickly, but swords are made of steel. Various types of steel of varying quality, but generally steel is pretty strong, so you won't have to worry about that. A sword properly maintained can be passed down through the generations, and often are or were. Now, obviously, we don't do that as much anymore. Mostly it's just wall hangers that get passed down. Hey, look at this cool sword my granddad had. Oh yeah, made in Pakistan. don't swing it too hard, or the blade will literally come flying out. So basically, the best reason that you could have to parry with the edge of the blade is it's a lot more likely to stop the opponent's attack instead of just have them push through it. It's hard to demonstrate sitting down with just one person, but if I take my sword like that, and I've got an opponent's blade coming in like that, it tends to bend a lot more than if I do this. So, if you are fighting for your life, you are probably going to want the best defensive option, or an offensive option, depending on what the situation is, depending on what kind of opportunities you have to strike. And in a lot of cases, parrying is your best defense. But if you've got a shield, then, you know, just use a shield. Why would you be parrying with your sword if you have a shield? I mean, if your shield is up here because you're fighting two opponents, and then someone swings at you from the other side, and, you know, put your sword out there and stop him from hitting you. If your other shield is busy blocking arrows or blocking something else, then yes, that does make sense why you would want to parry with your sword. Or if it's something like a Zweihander, which literally just means two-hander, which is a sword that's too big to use for one hand. Essentially. So reasons to parry with the flat of the blade, which I would not recommend, you're less likely to damage your edge, basically. And that will keep your cutting in good shape. Well, your cuts are going to be nice and clean instead of having a little metal burr that sticks off and tears things, which against plate armor or a shield isn't really going to make much of a difference anyway, so you shouldn't be too worried about that. But the main problems, as I said earlier, are that they slide around a lot more, giving your opponent a lot more control and maneuverability, and they could just power right through depending on where they hit. So, for anyone who still thinks that it's a good idea to try to parry with the flat of the blade, just keep that in mind next time you're in a real sword fight, because, let's be honest, when are you going to be in another sword fight? Practicing HEMA is a lot of fun, but I don't think it'll have any real-life applications. Not the same way it used to. Anyway, so I hope you found this at least somewhat entertaining. I know it's kind of short and rambly, but I wanted to get at least a few more videos out before I leave, because I don't know when I'm going to be able to record next. So if you enjoyed, you know what to do. Thanks for watching, and have a good one, folks. Or don't. It's your choice.